I've come across times where, finance managers will argue who's getting the last deal because it's late. And I'll say to them, I don't care who takes the last deal. All I care about is that customer's happy and they walk out of here feeling good about themselves. And we put the deal on the books. That's it. That's all I care about. We are a service at the end of the day.
On this episode of A Call to Leadership, I am thrilled to have you join me on a very important topic, motivation and inspiration of our people in our organizations. How do we even begin to motivate people when we have a blanket set of rewards that we think will satisfy everyone in a tangible way? That's just not how business and people work. We're going to unpack that. I've invited an expert on the show, Jason Catlin. Can't wait for you to join me. I'm Dr. Nate Sala, and this is A Call to Leadership. Jason, so good to have you on the show.
Well, thanks for bringing me on. I really appreciate it. I'm kind of humbled a little bit that you thought of me to come onto your show.
Absolutely. You and I have been connected for so many years now, and we share a desire to do the best possible work we can do. And we've had lots of conversations over the years on how to excel, how to produce excellence, and especially in the realm of sales leadership, right? I heard it said that everyone is selling, and it's such a difficult phrase to accept because there's a negative stigma.
Absolutely.
Right. Especially, we'll get into it because you've been in
especially
automotive
in the car
sale,
business,
right?
Yeah.
So what is the perception of someone that's in sales in automotive from the general public?
So the problem is, the car business has been around for a very long time. And back before the internet age, obviously there was no pricing on cars. The dealerships really decided on what you was going to spend or what they discounted, or there was really no regulations around what actually happened. And that stigma stuck around for a very long time. And it's unfortunate because this day and age, that can't happen. There's all these companies that regulate what we do, our financial side, our paperwork side, registrations, advertising, you name it. We're all regulated in some way, shape, or form. And it's tough at times because a lot of people have this assumption and there's this stigma behind the car industry that really doesn't exist this day and age. It just doesn't. Mm-hmm. Don't get me wrong, there's still people around that kind of do play by those rules a little bit, but they're few and far between these days. It's not as bad. But from my standpoint, going into the leadership part that we're going to talk about, I have a passion to change that opinion of what people think about the car industry as a whole. Because at the end of the day, all we're doing is providing a service that people require. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I try to address with clients myself is, I didn't come and knock on your door. You came to me. I'm trying to just provide the service that you wanted.
Yeah.
And that's something that's hard to get over at times.
Well, I've heard it said like this, that people don't want to be sold, but they love to buy.
Correct.
And I try to phrase it in ways that, all business is problem solving. If there were no problems to solve, we wouldn't have any business. We'd all be out of business.
Yeah.
So as you said, someone comes to you, they have a problem, right? And my responsibility, my role is to provide a service that helps you solve that problem.
Absolutely.
And I think that changes the dynamic of the relationship because when you're selling, if you will, right, air quotes, then it can be an adversarial relationship because you're trying to take something from someone, at least they're perceived. You're trying to take their time and or their money or both. But when you're solving, it goes from adversary to ally.
See, something you said there that really rings true with me is relationships. A lot of people need to realize that, especially, and I'm not talking about customers, I'm talking about salespeople specifically, that it's all about the relationship. People don't buy from companies, they buy from people. They buy from people they trust, the people that they believe are trying to do the right thing and trying to solve the right problem. What tends to happen for me, what I see, is the younger generation don't know necessarily how to fix that problem and find the solution to the customer's problem. And that's when they become that defensive customer because they think they are just trying to sell to, but that's not how it should be. It's definitely got to be a consultative role.
Yeah.
And that's I agree with you 100%. That's something that it's hard because you kind of have to, like you said, you have to become, you're an adversary, but also you got to be their partner at the same time, their team on their team. And it's kind of a very fine line or a double-edged sword that you're playing on a daily basis.
Right. Yeah. Because people want advocates. They want someone who's going to fight for them. And in fact, I was recently in the market for an RV, and I was back and forth with one of the sales guys, and he said something in one of his emails that really resonated with me when we were going back and forth on some pricing. And he said, "I will fight for you." And he meant it. Certainly you can say that, right? But by his demeanor, by his tone when we were actually speaking, I believed it. And it created a sense of connectedness. Like you said, that relationship. We were establishing a relationship. And even if I don't buy from that individual, I will never forget this salesperson. And I will likely go back to this individual next time I'm in the market.
And even if you don't necessarily go back, you might refer someone to him and say, I had a great relationship with this guy. I know that I didn't necessarily give him my money or help him in any way, shape, or form, but I liked him. And I think that would be a good thing for you. That's happened to me so many times in my career, where I'll have people say, oh, such and such sent me over to you. And I can't even remember that person because they probably didn't buy a car from me. And I was like, yeah, sure, come on in. But it takes me a while to figure out who they're even talking about.
Yeah. And
that's because you've got to leave them floating high when they leave, even if they don't buy a car from you. It's all about that relationship. And it's, I'll use this very strong word. You've got to figure out whether it's a transactional purchase or if it's an emotional purchase. And that's where it becomes a little difficult. And teaching that to the younger generation of getting them to figure out with that customer, is it transaction or is it an emotional purchase? Because if it's transactional, they're very hard. They're the hardest ones to really win over and become a friend, because they look at you as just literally like a retail store and say, okay, I'm just coming in to purchase a car and I don't need to have a relationship with you. But that's not our industry, unfortunately. It is all about relationships. It just is.
So what strategies or tactics do you employ to move someone from simply a transaction to the emotional aspect of it, where it's more relational?
I'm very big into what we call the steps of the sale. And the fourth step of the sale really is an immense time in the transaction that you have to be good at. That's fact-finding information. It goes back to exactly what you said, which I loved it, is you are then going to work with them and doing it for them rather than, they just came in on let's say a Ford Explorer, and you go get the key and show them the car and just sell them the car. You ask them why they need that car, or what is it about that car that they need it for? Is it a budget thing, or is it the technology? Do you need the third row seats, or what is it about the car? And you find out that car probably isn't the car for them, and you tell them, hey, based on my opinion and my expertise, this is probably a car that's better suited for you. You gain way more respect from that customer and way more trust from that customer by doing it. That car might be the right one, but if you explain why it's the right one, and it's kind of funny, and you'll love this. I don't know if you've heard of Simon Sinek.
Of course, sure. Yeah.
So he has the golden circle, which I'm sure you've seen, and it's exactly what we're talking about. The what, the why, the what, the how. Well, everyone that sells, generally speaking, go how, what, why. And I'm trying to teach my guys, it's not about all that. It's about the why. That's why are they purchasing the car? Why are you doing what you're doing? And it's funny, actually, last weekend, I actually did a sales training session, and it was all about what is your why? Why do you come out to work every single day to do it? And what I tried to make them understand is there's one thing you know what your why, but there's another thing knowing what the customer's why is.
Yeah.
Why are they buying that car? And that's the biggest thing that I see. It's bigger than just a transaction.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, okay, so let's do some role playing. Okay. So my son's 15 now. He'll be 16 in about 8-9 months. And I come in and I say, I need to get a car somewhere around $10,000 to $15,000. Obviously, it's going to be a pre-owned car.
Yep.
And what's your next step for me? What would you ask me?
So my next step really would be, first off, the way I do things is a little different to most. We wouldn't even talk about the car. If you were somebody I didn't know, I would try and make a friend. First off the bat, I would literally take the selling aside. I wouldn't even care about the car. I would talk about you. I'd talk about your son. You know, most people talk about their families and they're proud of their families, so they'll talk about them. And I'll kind of get you to warm up to me a little bit first. And then I'll transition. You know, I spend 5-10 minutes just building what we call building rapport. And then I'll go back to finding out really what it is you're trying to achieve. Is it that you need a reliable car because he's going to college, or what is it that you need that car for? What is the real reason you need that car? Are you just trying to get an A to B car so the price is all that matters? Are you trying to find something that's reliable? Are you trying to find something that's going to be a little nicer for him? Are you trying to find something that's fast or safe? Or what I have to ask you everything that I need to know to find you the right car for you. And it's kind of like real estate in a way. You know, when you go and just meet a realtor, good ones will ask you, you know, how many kids you have, how many bedrooms you want. It's basically the same. In your head, the idea is to build the car in your head, so then you know which road to go down.
Right.
And that's where a lot of most people who get in the industry this day and age, it's tough because they only see it as a transaction, and it's not only a transaction.
Yeah.
And that's what's frustrating for me as a leader, to try and get them to understand that it's a transaction.
Yeah.
I'll give you a quick example of the way. I've got a young guy who works for me now, never sold cars before, and he's got a lot of ability and he's got a lot of potential. But what he does is when the customer comes in, he treats it totally transactional. The customer says to him, I'm not ready to buy today. That's the be all and end all as far as he's concerned. And that's not necessarily the case. So a lot of people say that because they're trained to say that. They're conditioned to say those things to take the edge off the salesperson. And I said to him, and he said to me, well, I don't want to bug these people. I said, I'm not asking you to bug them. I'm just asking you to ask them a question. And he doesn't understand that at times. And that's one of the hardest parts.
Yeah. No, that's good. It reminds me, there's an old show called The Huxtables with Bill Cosby from years ago. Yeah. And I remember there was an episode where they were going to look for a car. I believe it was for the son, Theo. And the father, who Bill Cosby is a doctor, of course, they're affluent, but then he tells his son, we have to dress down for this, to go to the car dealership and dress like we're kind of bummy, if you will, right? And for the purpose, of course, so that the car dealer doesn't take advantage of them, and so that is the preconceived notion, right? And I love how you stated that people don't do business necessarily with companies; they do business with people, and the same thing applies. And I think, and one of the reasons why it's good to have this conversation around the car business, because it's probably one of the most difficult businesses to have rapport and trust because of the stigma of cars. I mean, you go to do your taxes and it's not certainly the same relationship, right? You go to do a doctor to get a medical diagnosis, or you go to Costco to buy something, right? I mean, it's much different when you go to the car dealership. And your expectation is, okay, well, the dealer is going to try to sell me something I don't want, or he's going to try to sell me something that maybe is overpriced, or something that is not reliable, or you just go down the list of all the reasons. But that building of rapport, as long as, of course, you have integrity, is absolutely the first step. And something else you said that's important is, and the reason why we discuss this around sales leadership is because some of the aspects of what you just described are exactly what leadership is. One, you were in a motion of discovery, because leaders are discoverers. They have to discover where the follower, i.e. the customer, desires to go, so that they can influence that individual to go along that journey, so that they can achieve it and reach a better future state. I mean, that's 99% of leadership is about creating an environment to where we can foster people along that journey and reach it. That's at least effective leadership.
So I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's something that the reason I'm kind of grinning here is because it's something that I try to instill in my guy, everybody, even especially when I promote someone to a manager. I always like to promote from within. And the reason being that I do that is because it's my responsibility to walk them through that. And that's what a lot of managers don't necessarily understand, that just because you've become a manager, that doesn't make you above anyone else. In fact, if anything, your responsibility just became a lot greater, because now you're not worrying about what you're doing. You're worried about what everyone else is doing and how they're succeeding. Every day when I go into work, my goal is to make sure that everyone else is succeeding. And the reason being that is the case is when I was selling, all I had to care about was what I was doing. Now I have to care about what all 6 or 7 of my salespeople are doing, all 4 of my managers are doing, because I can control my own destiny when I'm a salesperson, because I've only got to look after me. Now my destiny is reliant on everyone else's destiny, and I have to make sure that they're doing what I need them to do, not just for me, but for them to succeed too, because if they succeed, I succeed. And that's how, and it's a different frame of mind that a lot of managers don't necessarily understand. And, we can talk about dictatorship versus leadership. We all know what that is. A dictator would, you go do what I tell you to do. Not what I'd say, just go do what I tell you to do. Whereas I very much lead from the front, and I've always told my managers specifically, don't tell them, go show them. Go show them what to do, and they'll absorb it way faster. And then not only that, we go back to the relationship part. When you're leading a salesperson, let's say, you go show them how to do it, their respect elevates real fast.
Yeah.
Because not only do they realize, well, he didn't really do that for himself, he did that for me. Because at the end of the day, they gain the most out of each sale versus the managers. Because ultimately the managers, yes, do they get paid more? Of course they do. But when it comes to that one deal, the salesperson gets paid way more on that one deal than the managers do. The managers do it from a grander scale because they get paid on everything. And that's one thing that I've ingrained in myself. Don't forget where you come from, because if you go help them, they'll help you. And I've said to many a manager, and I actually learned this from a guy who I started to work for in this country first. And he said to me, with salespeople, you can take care of them and they'll take care of you. Or they can take care of you relatively fast. And it's the truth. They can really take care of you in a bad sense really fast.
Absolutely. And I think you're touching on these important aspects of this entire leadership philosophy that's been growing. And I've actually been doing a small mini series on it on our show called Servant Leadership. And it's a whole philosophy around leaders operating to serve those who follow them. And I think you're touching on that, even as you're talking about how you go through a process of not just telling your people, but actually walking them through the process through example, because what you're doing is you're saying, you're important enough for me to devote my time, because I'll never get this time back. And of course, yeah, you're being paid, but you can be doing something else. And you're saying, I'm going to allot this time, and it's just for you. It's just for you, so that I can make you better at what you do. And then you move from transaction, from the relationship in your business with your employees, to transformation, because they're being transformed into somebody who has more skill, more ability, more opportunity. And that is something that stays with them forever.
Hey, nothing fills me personally with more pride when I get to promote somebody, even if it's outside of my dealership. Because at the end of the day, I've achieved my goal. That's what I come to work every day. I come to work to make everyone better, and then eventually they will go where they need to go. I've never stood back and said, "Oh no, you're not taking this salesperson because he's my best guy, and I don't want to get rid of him." Okay, take him. I'm not going to stand in anyone's way to progress their lives. That's the whole point of being a leader, right?
That's strong, because many people, don't you think they grip onto that because they want to have control, and it's really based out of fear.
It is based
fear of loss. Yep. But if you believe that the people who are meant to be with you will stay with you, and the people that are meant to move on will move on, and you will then continue to grow and thrive, you have nothing to fear.
Well, I'm glad you said what you said, because a lot of people who know me, loyalty is a huge deal for me. And why I say loyalty, I don't necessarily mean you have to work for me. Just remember that if I helped you in your career, I'm not asking you to acknowledge that to everyone else. Just know that I helped you. That's all I ask. And why loyalty is so important to me, I'll give you the reason why I say this. And I try and teach this all the time is I always say to my managers, if an employee quits, you got to look at it like you got fired. Because at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to make them successful. And if they felt the need to quit, that means you did something wrong in their progression. So when someone quits under me, I take it very personally because I'm like, what did I do wrong or what didn't I do to help them to succeed in their role? Now I get it. Not everyone's fit for the job. Not, we all have our own traits and what we're good at and what we're not good at. And some people just don't fit in sales sometimes. But I still take it personally because I feel like everybody can do what I do. I'm not arrogant enough to sit down and say that no one else can do what I do. That's not true. They can. Now they're going to have to put the hard work in to do it. But the fact of the matter is you can do it.
Yeah.
And that's why I take it more personally than most. And actually, a lot of people that would probably agree with me with this, I probably keep hold of people a lot longer than I really should. Because I feel like I owe it to them to keep helping them and keep helping them and keep helping them. Now there's a line I end up drawing at some point and going, I've done everything I can do. I can't make this work. But I probably keep people around a lot longer than I should.
Have you always been like that? Of course, you grew up, I guess what we'd say, across the pond, right?
Exactly, yeah.
So, and what part of the UK did you grow up in?
So I grew up in a small town called Burn-on-Trent, which is a brewing town. The largest city really is Birmingham, which is close, probably like 30 minutes away. It's the largest city.
So when you were a kid, did you think, I'm going to go to America and I'm going to be a sales manager, a general manager at some point, right? of a car
Absolutely
dealership.
Not.
Yeah. What were your hopes and aspirations? Because, and I want to frame that around, clearly you're an affable kind of person, right? In other words, you're likable. There's that formula, know, like, trust, buy in the sales cycle. Not everybody's like that, but you'd mentioned that you can teach people. Now, were you always like that? Were you always somebody that enjoyed relationships and wanted to help people?
So it's actually funny. I've always been a really independent person, and I've not really been one to really be around people or even help them in that sense. I've always been a team player. Growing up playing soccer, growing up in a locker room, you kind of that team environment really ingrains in you. And I think where some of the loyalty comes from with me is I was lucky enough to play on teams where the same team played a lot. So I'll give you an example. The Sunday League team I played for, we were my high school team and also our county team. And then when we all started growing down our career paths, we all went together. There was only ones or twos that went in with each other. And that was something that kind of, I think when I look back, was like, being together as a team like that means so much because the success that we had as a group made me realize, you might be able to bring onesie, twosie people into that group and they may flourish or they may not. But the core of that group, it's that group that made us all successful. It wasn't just one person. And that team thing was really big to me. And it just always was.
Would you encourage that? Like, would that be something that you would encourage for the listener who wants to be able to thrive in an environment that way, to join some kind of a sporting team if possible, or any type of team? Let's
touch on this for the automotive business. So the automotive business is very, I won't say difficult for the team thing, but it is a very selfish job as a salesperson. And it kind of has to be. But I've always ingrained, and anyone on my team will admit this, that I'm very much a team player. And I'm going to talk about a guy that I talk about a lot. And we've got Zach in the room too, who's probably going to say, again. But I'm a big fan of Sir Alex Ferguson. Sir Alex Ferguson, for any of the American listeners who don't know who he is, he's actually the most winningest coach of all time in any sport. He doesn't get much notice because he's in the soccer world in America. You got your Vince Lombardis and all those guys that say, they're the most winningest coach. Alex Ferguson outbeats them in millions of times over. He's won the Premier League the most time. He was Manchester United's manager through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. He was actually with the same team for 27 years. And my philosophy was there's no one bigger than the team. And that was kind of his philosophy. He had some world-class superstars, and he would sell them. And I'm sure you've heard of Cristiano Ronaldo before, right?
Yes.
Everyone's heard of him. He let him leave at the pinnacle of his career. And he said, and his words were, no one's bigger than this team. If he wants to leave, let him leave. The team is the team. And I don't know what it was about that, but that really stuck with me and goes, he's right. It doesn't matter if the big player leaves. The team, as long as the team's philosophies and processes and culture is still there, there's going to be people that come and go. There always is going to be people that come and go, but it still keeps the consistency there. And that's something that I've always believed in from an early age, because that's how he was. So yeah, it's not necessarily something that the automotive does by design, but I've always felt it's made me successful in my career.
Well, I would think that it also adds this idea of cohesiveness, that you've got each other's back. And on one of our interviews, I had a retired Air Force colonel, Rob Cujo Teschner, and he talked about the military. And he stated that the military, as far as the Air Force, is all about the team. You know, these fighter pilots in formation,
yep.
and they have each other's backs, and they're all professionals, and they work together to achieve a common goal. And there's security in that. And even if one person is no longer on the team, then the team is still intact and the mission is still intact, and you move forward. And it's interesting that you bring that up, because especially in sales, you're right. There's this mindset that it's just me, right? I've got to hunt and kill.
Yep.
But I think that when you, and as a leader, right, when you set the tone and say, you know what, we're a team, guys. We're going to help each other out wherever we can. If this customer isn't working out with you, maybe
you need to go to somebody else.
You go with somebody else. Does that ever happen?
Absolutely happens all the time. Now, a lot of older sales people wouldn't want that to happen.
Yeah.
But as I always say to them, let me ask you a question. Would you rather have no sale or half a sale?
Right.
When you think about it selfishly.
Yeah.
Ultimately, the only thing that matters is, in my store specifically, the only thing that matters is the customer taken care of, and are we gaining what we want? That's all I care about. You know, I've come across times where, you know, finance managers will argue who's getting the last deal because it's late. And I'll say to them, I don't care who takes the last deal. All I care about is that customer's happy and they walk out of here feeling good about themselves, and we put the deal on the books. That's it. That's all I care about.
Yeah.
I don't care who needs to go home and who's got something. I need you to go and just do what we're supposed to do. We are a service at the end of the day, and we need to make sure that service gets completed. And the service is, go do the paperwork on the car so I can take it home. That's the end of it. And it's hard sometimes to get people to understand that's the most important thing. And that's why I went back to that. What is your why? Mm. Why did you come here? Is it because a lot of people have never thought about it before, always come up with the same answer. Money. It can't be money. That's the result. That isn't the why. That's the result. Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot of people get. It was kind of ironic on Saturday when we did the meeting. I went around the whole room, and everyone told me what their why is, but none of it was a why. It was all a result. Every single person. So I kind of let them all go, and then when we came around, I said, "Did you see a common theme here?" And everyone was like, "No, why?" I said, "Do you not realize that everyone's why was a result, not a why?" Mm. So they said, "Well, what's your why?" So I told them what my why was. And my why is my family. The reason I go to work every single day isn't for me. I want to provide a life for my children that they don't ever have to worry. And it's not necessarily about money or security. It just means that they don't have to concern themselves with it. I'm going to provide for my kids and my wife, whichever way that is. And that's all that matters to me.
Yeah. Well, and that brings up this mindset, and some of our listeners would have heard this on a previous episode about the survival mindset, because when you talked about your family, which is extremely noble, and I share that affinity for providing. When you can take the survival mindset out of the equation, then you can really look at growth. When you're in a survival mindset, a worry mindset, you're only thinking about the moment.
Yep.
And you can't think about the future.
You're thinking about the result.
Exactly.
That's all you think.
Yeah. Only the result is I have to survive right now. But if you take that off the table and you create an environment that's safe, is what you're talking about, right? Safety. And now, don't get me wrong, there's times for challenge and stress and tension because we can grow in those situations. But when the tides turn to where it's just survival, then there really is no growth. So if you take that off the table and you say, look, team, whether it's a family team or a business team, we're going to be in thrive mode, not survive mode. And create an environment where people can truly thrive by getting all of the necessary needs met. And of course, some of their wants too. Of course, it's your needs are limited, but your wants are unlimited.
Yeah.
Right. So when you were in a sales position and you moved to a management position and taking those basic concepts with you, did you then begin to immediately transition that and to share that and to become a teacher, or
Yes.
how did that happen?
So, I did want to bring this up. One of the hardest parts about becoming a manager for me was I never understood why people didn't want it like I wanted it. I never understood that they weren't hungry like me. And in the beginning, when I was made a sales manager at 27, when I did that, I always had a fire in my belly that was like, I gotta succeed. And I'm a big fan of a guy called Eric Thomas, which I'm sure you've heard of. He's a big motivational speaker. And, there's always a quote that I love that he's always said, you got to want it as bad as you want to breathe. And that's kind of always been me. And it was so frustrating in the beginning when I just would watch these salespeople not want it. And I'm like, why are you here? If you don't want it, why don't you want it? And it took me a long time really to mature and realize that not everyone's wants and needs are the same. And that's the difference. One thing that I teach my sales managers now is you need to know each person as an individual, because one of the owners back in the UK, actually, who I owe a lot of my career to, he always used to say to me, when you become a manager, if you think they've got to change for you, you're wrong. You've got to change for every single one of them in that moment. And that's one of the hardest things for any human to do, because our natural instincts is we're always right. And that might not be the case in that scenario. And you have to realize what triggers people and what makes them tick and what makes them succeed. And a lot of the times as a leader, it's more trial and error than anything. There's some people that respond to being yelled at and grilled, and they'll go, I'm going to prove you wrong, and go do it. And there's other people you do that with, and they'll go into their shell, and you'll never get them out again. It's hard, and the problem is in the car industry specifically, you get a lot of people say, "Oh, well, you've got favorites." No, I don't. I just manage to what works with them.
Right.
Just because I yell at one person and then I don't with another doesn't mean I'm treating them differently. I am, but I'm going about it in a different manner.
Well, what you're talking about, it reminds me of an old leadership theory called the expectancy theory. There was a guy named Victor Vroom back in the late 50s and the 1960s, so really old. But he was tasked to come up with a theory of work and motivation, basically what motivates people to work, right? And this is what you're talking about, motivation. And what he came up with, some consider it too simple, but some consider it to be valid. And it's actually a number of other leadership theories are based on this one theory. But basically, the expectancy theory is based on what people's expectations are. And he said that people will put forth a certain level of effort, which becomes performance, which then has an outcome, a reward, and then satisfaction. And he says, people generally will assume that the reward is why people put effort, but it's not.
It's never is.
It's the last piece. It's the satisfaction. It's what satisfies me. And we focus so much on rewards and not the satisfaction. And it is individual based, as you said. So I've got to figure out what truly satisfies that individual for them to give me the maximum amount of effort. I.e., if someone is more satisfied with proving me wrong, then I have to put that out there. If someone is more satisfied with me walking them along a journey that's more kind and relaxed, and then that will be their way. Maybe someone's more satisfied simply by financial measures, right? Sometimes they're more satisfied with having having just the security to know that you're happy with their performance, right? There's all different reasons, but each person
is totally different.
And it's our responsibility as leaders to understand that. And that's where I think one of the most underutilized aspects of not only leadership, but sales comes into play, and that's listening.
I was taught early on that, and this is another shout out to my old owner back in the UK. When I first started selling cars, he pulled me aside one day. His name was Dave Manning. He's a great friend of mine, very successful, who started his business from ground up. And he said to me, "You know what, Jason, you're a really good salesperson. So you know your biggest problem is?" He said, "God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. How's about you listen twice as much as you speak?" Now, I talk a lot, but I also listen very, very hard. And I baffle a lot of people sometimes that my wife will probably totally disagree with this, but that I listen to what they say so much that I retain it for a long time. And I'll go back to it and say, "Well, remember when you said," and they'll say, "How do you remember that?" I was like 2 weeks ago. Well, because I'm selling you, and I'm absorbing all that information so I hate to use this terminology, but use it against you later. And that's kind of what sales is. And I don't want to say using against you because that's wrong, really, the word, but it's using all that information to find what the end result needs to be. And that's why listening is important. And you're 100% true. Most people don't listen. That's the problem.
No, especially, and I try to even pick it out in sales, in a sales environment. If you'll just listen, I will tell you how to sell
what
me.
You need. Yeah, exactly.
You're right.
Yeah.
I will tell you, once I tell you what I need, and if you have what it takes to solve my problem, all you have to do is just simply provide it. But so many, and I'm sure, you and I have an ear for it now, and I'm sure you do it too when you go into a whatever business and to purchase something, you probably do the same thing to where you're like, if you just wait long enough and just listen, I'm going to give you all the tools you need to close or to convert, if you will, or whatever terminology you want to use to make me a customer, right?
Yeah.
And so it's not that difficult, really, to establish rapport.
Do you know one thing that I've always said, Nate, that a lot of people get aggravated with me about? I always say, you know what the biggest problem is in the car industry? Is the people. I'm not talking about the people who are buying the car. I'm talking about the people that work there. I say, you're the problem. Because like you said, you don't listen. You don't spend the time. You just want to get to the end result. You skip all the steps. I use this analogy with my salespeople, and it's kind of silly, but so what I've done before is I've brought a microwave in and I'll take a instant mac and cheese and I'll put it on the table and I'll say, what happens if I just stick that in the microwave and just put it in the microwave right now and turn it on? And most of them look at me and say, well, it'll burn, set on fire, whatever. I said, there's a reason why there's directions on the back of it. It's just like selling cars. There's a reason why we have a roadmap to sell. It's the directions of how to sell a car. And most of you don't do it. What most of you do is the customer walks in, you shake their hand, Nate, nice to meet you. What can I help you with today? Oh, I'm looking at a Ford Explorer. You go get the key, show them the car, they come back and you say, oh, do you want to buy the car? I said, that's like taking the mac and cheese and sticking it in the microwave and turning it on. You wonder why it blows up in your face. Of course it blows up in your face. You didn't do anything. You're not trying to set the expectation for the customer. You're not trying to build rapport with the customer. You're not trying to find out if that car makes sense for them or not. You're not doing it for them. You're doing it for you.
And it's really kind of lazy.
It's extremely lazy. I'm a very process-driven person. Anyone that works for me, I'm extremely crazy.
What about systems? Because I've heard it said this way, people don't fail, systems do. Right? If you can create systems that work, then people can follow them, and then they can duplicate them.
It's the same as any something I learned in business school was this: the 3 Ps: people, process, product. If you got the people, you got the product, you put a process in place, it'll always work. Mm-hmm. The problem is, you might have the people, but whether they follow the process, and that's where it always breaks down. Yes. 9 times out of 10, you've always got the product, whether that's a car or a taxi guy or whatever that service is. It doesn't matter what it is. You've always tended to got the product, else it wouldn't be around. It's whether you can have the right people in there doing the right processes to make it work.
I'll give you an example of that from a customer perspective. So I was in the market for a vehicle. I was texting with a number of different sales representatives, and I ended up finding the one I wanted. And I got a text from each of the salespeople that I wasn't going to buy from, and I responded and said I decided to go a different direction. 1 out of 4 responded to me and said, "Congratulations, glad you found what you wanted. Let me know if you need anything else." That's part of a process, right? Because the other 3 have a different process. Like, oh, he's not going to buy anything from me. I'm not even going to respond.
Exactly.
Right?
Who cares? He's gone.
But the one that followed through, guess what? I locked that individual's number and name in my phone simply because his process created a deeper relationship, and I realized that he wasn't just about the sale. He was like, you know what? And it was sincere, because he was sincere along every aspect of this experience that I had. And I think that's what we can transition this conversation to, because it's really about the experience. Everything we do in leadership or in sales is about the experience we create. And we create the experience. That's leadership, right? We can create an experience that's pleasant or unpleasant. It's totally up to us. Yeah. And I think, guys like you have mastered how to create a pleasant experience in such a way that you build the rapport, you help people to find the value in whatever it is that you might be able to sell them, or to find value in another route. Like you said, sometimes they don't buy for whatever reason. Maybe it isn't the best fit. And I think having the confidence in that is also important to know.
Absolutely.
Hey, look, you know what? I'm going to try to help you. And if I can, fantastic. If not, maybe I've got a colleague. And I'm always doing that too. Like in my business, same thing.
Let me give you an example which really hits home with that. I've got a gentleman who buys cars from me. I'm not joking. I've been here since 2008. He's probably bought in excess of 30 vehicles off me in that time.
Wow.
He does pretty well. He's a foot doctor. He's got his own practice. John and I have become such good friends, and it's only due from me selling him cars. But we've come to such good friends, which I'm now at a point where every single transaction he makes when it comes to cars, whether he buys from me or not, he always consults with me and says, "Is this a good deal? Should I get it?" Because he understood that I'm not out of. It's not about just me. If I don't have the car for you, or I can't make it work, or someone else has got the car, I'll help you buy that car. It's not about that for me. And I love that, because everybody wants a go-to person in every industry. They want whether it's a doctor, whether it's a lawyer, whether it's an accountant, whether it's a mechanic, whether it's a car salesperson, whether it's back in the day, we used to have our Wi-Fi people, right? Your speaker person, right? Just go down the list of people that you want to set it and forget it. So become that person. I say that all the time. I say to every single person that works for me, be their car guy. Your goal should be their car guy forever, no matter what it is. We just created.
What about the gals?
Let's say car person.
Yeah, there you go.
But same difference. We just created a Facebook page called STL Bronco, and the reason why I made that page wasn't to try and get business. It's just to let everyone know that if you have any questions about a Bronco, Lou Fuseford is the place to come to, because we'll answer the questions for you. And I'm talking to a lady right now where she actually bought a Bronco, or ordered a Bronco out of state from a different dealer. And we've been talking on Facebook Messenger for a little bit, and she's like, "Let me ask you a question. Is there any way you can help me find out where my car is in the process?" I said, "Sure. Send me the dealer code, send me your order number, and I'll do some digging for you." And I got it for her, and it was bad news, unfortunately, but I still gave it to her. And she said, "Well, can you order a Super Duty?" And I said, "Sure." She goes, "Okay, I'm going to send my husband to you." I said, let me tell you something, Michelle. I said, this wasn't why I did that. I had no intentions of you buying a car from me. I just wanted to make sure that you were getting the service that you provided. And she said, "Is there any way I can switch my order to you?" I said, "Look, you could. I could sit here right now and give you all the reasons why." I said, but I'm going to be honest with you. You're probably going to wait as long as you're going to wait with them as you are going to with me at this point. So instead of rocking the boat, just stay with them, and I'll help you in the future for anything. I've basically gained a loyal customer for life. Mm-hmm. And I didn't do anything. I just talked to her.
Yeah.
And helped her.
Yes. Well, and let's walk that through with this 4-part process, this know, like, trust, buy process, right? So obviously, clearly, the first step is to know you, right? Because you can be the best in the business, and if you don't stand out in the crowd, if you don't differentiate, if you don't find a way for people to know who you are, then you can just forget about it. So that's the first step. But the second step is the like step, right? People have to actually like you. And I think that, you
have to be genuine though with that.
Well, the like, yeah. So this is where the sincerity comes in, right? Authenticity. Yeah. Genuinity, right? Because I think people can see through that.
Yeah.
I think
they
people
do.
are
Absolutely.
smart.
Absolutely.
They can see when you're just saying what sounds good.
Yep.
Versus when
the best time for that, Nate, that I've seen is when you have, and I catch it straight away, is when you have somebody, a salesperson specifically, that agrees with everything. Because I sit there and I kind of look at it and go, you really agree with everything I just said? Me as a salesperson, I would rather say, no, I don't really agree with that. I think you should look at this option instead. I think you gain way more respect by actually not agreeing with everything, because I think that's where you see through it. Someone who's really just agreeing with everything, you're like, really, come on?
Yeah.
You really expect me to believe that you agree with everything that I say? Because the human race just don't always agree. They just don't. It doesn't make it wrong. We just don't.
Plus, I think that there's a part of that says, if I don't agree with you and I give you a compelling enough reason to why, then you're actually helping me to better understand something.
Exactly.
So if you're just agreeing with everything I say, then are you really helping me to understand something that you're a subject matter expert in?
Yeah. And that's, I'm so glad you said that, because that's something that I try to make everybody who works underneath me understand. You're the professional, right? Learn your craft so you are the professional, and don't just come in every day and let the day go by and you're not good at what you do. They come to you for a reason. I've literally, and I'll tell you, and this sounds very brash and blunt, but I feel I've earned the right to ask these questions. When I worked at Plaza, I dealt with a lot of doctors. And I had this one gentleman one time who was one of those customers where he would be like, I've bought hundreds of cars. I know how this goes. So I said to him, I'm not trying to be rude. I said, but I've sold thousands of cars. So the difference between you and I is extreme. I said, I understand that you've had processes, but you haven't had processes the way I do it, okay? I'm the professional here. I said, if I have a heart problem, I don't go to a car guy. I go to a doctor to find out what that is. I said, you don't go to a hospital to buy a car. You come to a car guy to buy a car. I'm the professional here. So we're going to follow my process because I know how this should go. We're not going to follow. I said, if I come and get heart surgery with you, I'm not going to tell you how to do it because I don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And he bought a car for me. And when we left, he said, you know what? He said, you know why I bought a car from you? I said, why is that? He said, because you called me out on my BS. He said, I was trying to play the game and trying to be the hard ass and trying to get what I wanted. And you had total confidence to stand up to me and say, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And he said, I respect you for that.
You took leadership.
Yeah.
You took leadership. And I want to touch on something you said, is that learning your craft. You and I have had conversations off mic about this, is that you are a lifelong learner.
Absolutely.
I mean, just even our audience hearing, the quotes and the people you follow, and clearly you're focused on self-improvement and learning and being able to grow. And I think that's part of this transition from the like to the trust part, because you've got to be the one who has done the homework, done the research, done the heavy lifting for people to begin to trust you, at least with knowing your craft, right? There's other aspects of it too. And you talked about genuinity and, of course, integrity, having good character, because not only competence is important, but good character too, because you can't be trustworthy if you don't have one or the other. And this is if you remember Stephen Covey, he would talk about this in his Habits of Highly Effective People, right? And he talked about the pillars of trust being competence and character. You can be totally competent and have no character. You can't be trusted. You can have tons of character, but no competence. You can't be trusted. You need both. And this is where this example that you bring up with the doctor comes in, right? It's like, look, I have competence. I know this, and I have good character to lead you down a path that's going to be in your best interest, right? And then that trust factor begins to kick in, right? And then, of course, once they know, once they like, once they trust, and if you have whatever it takes to solve their problems, guess what happens? They buy.
Yeah, absolutely. Every single time.
And that's a process.
Yeah.
That's a process. That's a process. Let me ask you this. And this is important for people that have teams. And this is based on research around management. So there's studies that show that about 80% of people that get promoted from any position, we'll just call it sales, into management, feel that they are undertrained and they don't have the skills, underskilled for the position. And many of them flounder. Have you seen or have you experienced to where people get promoted from sales into management and for some of the wrong reasons and they're not suited for it?
I've had it happen recently.
Yeah.
I personally promoted someone that had a lot of ability, and I misjudged the situation. And when he actually became a manager, I guess he got this I've made it kind of mentality and didn't realize that it just started. Because I always say to people, you want to be a manager, but when you get it, you might not want to do it. Because now everything's on you. And that's the same as anything. The higher up you go, like yourself, you're a business owner. Ultimately, the buck stops with you.
That's right.
There's nowhere for it to go. You can't turn around and say, hey, Nate, can you deal with this one for me? Because you're it.
That's right.
And that's how, that's what happened in that scenario. It happens more often than you might realize. And I think we talk about leadership. I think a good leader notices talent, but I also think we need to realize when we make a mistake that it's okay to make the mistake. You just misjudge that one. We're not always going to get it right. If we did, we'd all probably be retired at this point. Because if we got it right out of the way, we'd made so much money we wouldn't need to worry about it. But yeah, I've made mistakes and I continue to make them. But then on other hands, where there's been people where I'm like, I'm not really sure about you. Are you going to make it? You come out of the gate and go and just nail it. And you're like, okay, I think it's just a matter of finding those little things. And I think and like you said, I think it's, when we go back to the training, it's noticing, do they have enough about them where you can coach them through that? And sometimes you just can't. Some people aren't coachable, unfortunately. It just is the way they are.
Yeah, and I think that coachability goes back to the learning, right? So learning having a teachable spirit, if you will, or having a learner's heart I consider it a non-negotiable in moving someone up and forward, because you have to be able to continue to add more skills to your repertoire of skills. And you can't do that with an ideology that says, I've figured it all out.
Yeah.
And that's like a death sentence.
Oh, absolutely. I 100% agree. I tell my managers every day, no one's made it, including me. We haven't made it yet. It's not over yet. It just started. We've got to keep going, keep learning. And you said this earlier on, and I'm not boasting about this, but you're 100% right. I'm constantly, every single day, learning something new about anything. It doesn't even necessarily have to be what I do. I'm very big into psychology. I like learning about psychology. And the reason being is I'm a strong believer that sales is psychology. And that's totally, if you went to, let's say, I'm not saying this even exists, but let's say you went to a stereotypical sales class, they wouldn't teach you psychology in there. But what I did is I've gone, okay, there's a lot of psychology in this. I need to learn this. All of it might not work in my industry or what I do. But if there's 2 or 3 things that I learn from it, and I have, And that I'll always find different areas that I think, I could use that in my job or in my career or in my life.
Yeah, it's universally applicable because it's about relationships. It's about human behavior. In fact, funny story, when I was young, I come from a family of merchants. So I was always in some kind of a business since I was a little kid, whether it's a pet shop or a grocery store or a bakery or just go down the line, always a family member's business. Well, by the time I got to college age, I was so sick of business that I enrolled in the philosophy department. Because I thought, what's the furthest thing from business? Philosophy. And so I started to try to figure out what's wrong with the world through philosophical, Kant and Descartes and all those philosophers. And then I realized, I couldn't figure out what's wrong with the world until I could figure out what's wrong with me. So then I switched my major to psychology. And then I figured neither of them paid anything, so I got a business degree. I came full circle. But having the background, at least the undergirding of philosophy and, of course, psychology, created a much broader understanding and richer concept and ability in business. Because I really understood, these are just people. They all have needs. And if we can work together, we can satisfy those needs. And as it's been said, if you can help people solve their problems, they will help you solve yours.
It's funny you say that because I've always had that philosophy. I don't really think there's any divide in industries. I think it's all the same. I'm big into, reading books about Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, all these, Elon Musk I'm reading right now. And it's not necessarily that I'm intrigued by them. I'm intrigued what they do is what I'm more intrigued by. Like Elon Musk, yes, he's the richest guy in the world right now. I'm not reading the book for that. I'm reading the book to find out what makes him different to everyone else. And it's funny because when you actually start reading all these different people, they all have the same traits, every single one of them. They're all identical people, identical in those business senses. That they don't follow money. None of them care about the money, to be quite honest. And it all goes back to that why they do it. That's all they care about. That's all it is.
Yeah.
And then what they do is they immerse themselves where there is no, what's the word I'm looking for? There's no, they'll never just make do. That's right. Steve Jobs, for instance, when he first started making the iPhone, he said, I want a glass screen. And all his technicians, and he wasn't a technician, all his technicians said, it never happened. Can't do it. It's got to be made out of plastic or something like that. Never happened. And he said, look, I don't care. It's going to be made out of glass. Make it out of glass. And they end up making it out of glass.
Find a way.
Then, lo and behold, it's the most historical selling phone on the planet.
Yeah, man. You're my kind of guy. I'm going to have to send you my dissertation. That's exactly what it was about. And you're right that there's so many common themes in these visionary leaders. And one of them is purpose over profit, as you had mentioned, right? And of course, they know that money is a necessary tool.
Correct.
And
a necessary result.
Indeed. It's a lagging indicator, if you will. But it's not their end-all, be-all. It's the purpose. And what's beautiful about many of these visionaries is their purpose is to impact the human condition in a way that progresses it and moves it forward. And that's where the sales leader or the leader in general will find more connection for that relationship. We keep coming back around to that because once someone knows that you're not only intimately acquainted, but driven and motivated to progress their personal condition, because that's what Steve Jobs did. That's what Elon Musk is attempting to do, right? I mean, with let's just use him as an example because it's so prominent right now, right? With, of course, the electric vehicles, right? He wants to help the planet to reduce emissions and move us forward. With the SpaceX, right? So that in his mind that we don't go extinct for whatever reason. We can, and of course, recently, this is the airing of this episode, Twitter, right? So that he, at least in his own mind, I don't even know if it'll go through now, but to create freedom of speech, right? I mean, so these are human condition impacts to help us to progress. And when someone cares enough about the individual condition, it creates a bond.
Absolutely.
That's why these people become icons.
And
an
that's why
icon is a symbol.
Attracted to them.
Yes, it becomes a symbol, a representation.
And it goes back to the same thing that we're talking about sales. All he's doing is selling himself. He's not he's not doing it on the standpoint of he wants a return from it. He's selling his why. That's what he's doing. And what it does is it gets everyone's attention, and that's why it becomes such an icon, because everyone's like, oh, I buy into that. Mm-hmm. And you speak to a lot of people who idolize these people. They don't look at them as just a celebrity. They look at them as their friend.
Right.
And that's all he did. Without even meeting these people, he made a friend.
Yeah.
It's goes back to the same thing. It's always back to relationships. Mm-hmm. It always goes back to that, whether you like it or not.
Yeah.
It's always there.
Make a friend.
Yeah.
It's that simple. Brother, as we wrap up this episode, I can't believe it's been almost an hour already. I'm going to throw a curveball at you. All right. One day, your journey in making friends and relationships will be at its peak. You'll be at this great summit. And you look back at the entire journey. What will you love most for people to remember you by?
Ooh, that is a curveball. It's kind of twofold. I've always wanted to remember to being successful, but what I mean by successful at my craft. Not necessarily just success for Jason Catlin. That's not the intention. The intention is to go, you know what, I remember this guy was phenomenal at what he did. And it's not really because they care about my name. Just remember that you can do whatever you want to do if you really put enough hard work into it. And I want to be remembered to say, you know what, he worked harder than anyone else and achieved his goals because of that reason. But ultimately, on the second part of it, the reason I do what I do is really so when I look back and I'm retired, let's say, I see all these people that worked underneath me are all in a place now they want to be in. That they're all managers, or they all are in their own dealerships, or whatever they decide to do. But I contributed to that success. That's all I care about. Because ultimately the way I see it is if they succeed, I succeeded. Yeah. And it's the same with my kids and my wife. And that goes back to my why is I just want to make sure that if I can input in their success in any way, shape or form, then I'll do it. I just want them to look back and I guess for my family it's more to be proud of me and look at me as a good provider for the family.
Well, you are on your way, my friend.
Well, I appreciate it.
So, in closing, who's winning the World Cup this year?
Well, I've actually stated that I think England can do it. This one might be weird.
Yeah, give me two or three.
And the reason why I say that is because the timing of it is going to be strange for everybody. Where they are located is going to be tough for everybody. I think I've got to go with, France probably again. They just seem to have that more of a well-rounded team. But I do think England have a shot.
Is France one of the biggest rivals for England?
No, I wouldn't really say so. No.
Just in the 1800s, I would think probably.
Yeah. But yeah, I would say. Yeah, they've got a pretty good chance.
Yeah, man.
See, I would have said Italy, but they didn't even qualify.
Whoops.
Yeah. You go from being European champions to not even qualifying for the World Cup. It's pretty bad.
There's always next year.
Yeah.
Man, good to have you. I know somebody has been blessed and impacted on this episode. Love to have you back and talk more about this important subject.
I appreciate you putting me on. Again, I'm humbled that you thought of me to come on. And this has been great. I've really enjoyed myself. Awesome. Like I said in the beginning, we could probably talk for hours and
days. Yeah, I appreciate you, man.
Right, appreciate it. That was awesome.
We did it.